Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Zoltan Diak, and thanks for joining us. Today, we'll be talking about DNS. DNS traffic is something every organization knows and loves, but what a lot of people don't know is it's been used to tremendous success by attackers recently in some of the bigger security headlines over the past year. Today, we'll be joined by a guy who lives and breathes DNS, one of our security services product managers, Arun Kumar. Hi, Arun. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Zoltan. Glad to be here.
All right. Well, let's just jump right into it. We're here to talk about DNS and some of the threats we're seeing there. Tell us why DNS is so important from a security perspective.
So DNS is the phone book of the internet. So you have human readable domain names being translated into IP addresses. So it's pretty essential for every businesses to run it. And there is absolutely no way around it. So everybody has to punch a hole on their firewall, allow DNS traffic through. And that is leveraged by the attackers. So they try to hide among that noise.
Well, to your point, Arun, I recently heard a statistic that over 80% of malware uses DNS to establish command and control. Can you tell us exactly what that means?
Sure. So most malware use a command and control channel to understand its next steps, and in some cases, even taking data out of your network. So what we have seen essentially with our Wildfire Cloud is over 80% of the malware we've seen essentially uses DNS to reach out to a command and control server. Think of it as this is a bidirectional thing. So attackers use it to create a channel, move things in and out of your network, exfiltrate data, push any kind of additional payloads that they need to move laterally within your network. So if you can secure your DNS traffic, you essentially are preventing 80% of these malwares.
Huge impact. So has DNS always been a common attack vector for adversaries, or what's really brought DNS to the fore today?
Yeah, most malware uses a command and control channel essentially to understand what its next steps are, or even in some cases to take data out of your network, exfiltrate data. And what we have seen is over 80% of the malware that we have seen in Wildfire Cloud uses DNS to reach out to a command and control server. You can think it of as people trying to get into your network, trying to get data out, push things in, move laterally, etc. So this attack vector is fairly abused by your adversary.
Okay, and you described, malware using DNS. Can you give us some examples of the more sophisticated threats we should be aware of that are taking advantage of DNS? Like, what are some specific kinds of attacks that you're seeing?
Yeah, so we do see different techniques being used. So the first one is DNS tunneling. DNS tunneling is where adversaries got into your network. They have infected an endpoint. They're trying to steal data, something like your product roadmap or maybe some other proprietary information, could be your financial data. So they are moving all these data out through the DNS channel. Essentially abusing the DNS protocol to transfer data out of your network. Then you have techniques like DGA or domain generation algorithm, where the malware essentially generates a new domain for command and control. So the C2 channel is a continuous revolving target. So in such cases, static signatures, etc., are not going to work. The domain being used for command and control is constantly revolving, constantly changing. And then we have things like fast flux, where a domain keeps changing its IP address. It's essentially to bypass any kind of IP controls you may have on your firewall. It also makes it difficult for any threat hunter to identify the location of the command and control. So you have all these kind of techniques that uses DNS.
So I've also heard about newly registered domains being a threat. What do you consider newly registered, and how is that a threat?
So our definition of newly registered domain is essentially something that a domain name has been registered in the past 30 days. 33 days to be exact. So what we have seen essentially at the onset of the pandemic, we saw basically new domains being registered, which had keywords like coronavirus, COVID, etc. And these kind of domains were being used to carry out things like phishing or carry out some kind of scams. So we saw a huge uptake in such domains getting registered. And obviously the goal was to get sensitive credential information or some other kind of personal information. So there was, a huge increase there.
Okay, and so you've told us about some of these attack techniques. Tell me what you're seeing in the real world. Are there some examples you can give us of campaigns that have used these techniques successfully?
Oh, absolutely. Have you heard of SUNBURST?
Yeah, that was a little minor attack that we saw, right?
I wouldn't call it a minor, but yeah. So SUNBURST came about sometime back in, when was it, November, December timeframe. What happened there was attackers basically compromised the SolarWinds supply chain, and it impacted multiple folks all around the world. Its impact is still being discovered, so we don't know how many other softwares got corrupted because of that and what extent the damage was created with that. In that particular case, what we saw was once the SolarWinds software was compromised, it tried to use a DGA DNS tunneling technique. And what it essentially did was encode the information about the host where it was installed back to the attacker. And that would give basically tell the malware what its next steps are. So if there was a DNS response coming back, which with the particular IP address, the malware can basically detect if it's a part of like a sinkhole or a sandbox environment, in which case the malware would just go quiet and not do any other action. Then we had other techniques or other campaigns, something that we discovered late October timeframe last year. It's been labeled xHunt. That particular campaign was essentially targeting government organizations in the Middle East. And over there too, I mean, you had an exchange server getting compromised, and then the adversary started taking out important financial information, important sensitive data through DNS tunneling. And the DNS tunneling technique that was used there was also very unique. It was using 4 different domain to exfiltrate data. So each domain getting a chunk of the data, and the adversary will then stitch up the data back together to get the file that they try to get out.
So thanks. Those are really good detailed examples. And, they sound very sophisticated, but we also have, sophisticated web security products. How are these attacks being successful? I mean, don't current web security products address DNS?
Well, the challenge with web security products is they mainly focus on web protocols like HTTP, HTTPS, with absolutely no focus on DNS. And as we have seen with whatever attacks that we have, like campaigns that we have seen, like DNS tunneling, DGA, FastFlux, etc., you need to inspect DNS there.
Thanks, Arun. So I know we're running out of time here. Just to summarize, it sounds like we have really sophisticated threats taking advantage of DNS traffic to execute attacks. And many organizations aren't properly monitoring DNS for a variety of reasons. So what would you recommend to customers who are looking for a security solution to help address those types of threats?
So yeah, so to recap, I mean, you have DNS, which is the biggest blind spot in your security. Most customers are not monitoring it, and attackers are taking advantage of that. And if you can secure your DNS traffic, as I mentioned earlier, you're disrupting 80% of the malware. So it's a huge bang for your buck. Now, what you need as a security solution is something that can take a look into all the DNS packets that are going on your network, do some kind of analysis on top of it, understand if there is any kind of DNS tunneling, DGA, FastFlux, etc., happening in your network, and be able to protect you from those kind of attack vectors.
Okay, thank you for sharing your insight again there, Arun. Folks, if you enjoyed this show, please like, subscribe, comment, and visit PaloAltoNetworks.com. See you in the next episode.